when policy is made, it does affect real people. They are individual people who've got names, people with families facing homelessness.
Welcome to Talking Shop, the Communities Inc. podcast. Episode 6, What is the Refugee Crisis?
Hi everyone, we're joined by Adam from Refugee Roots today. Hi Adam.
Hello, it's good to be here with you today.
Great. So do you want to just start by telling us a little bit about who you are and some of your background?
Yeah, well, my name's Adam Baker. I'm the charity director at Refugee Roots, where I've been for just over 6 years. And before that, I'd worked in charities, and I'd also worked in music as a musician as well. So that was a bit about my background.
Right, so quite a wide-ranging history from music and charities. Tell us a little bit about Refugee Roots. What sorts of programmes do you run? What do you do?
Refugee Roots welcomes all, and in particular we support refugees and asylum seekers to build friendships and find a place to call home. It's all about providing a place to belong, so support initiatives that help build strong connections between local people and refugees so that they can access the support that they need, but also overcome some of the barriers and challenges that they face coming to a new environment. Some of those initiatives include a one-to-one befriending project where volunteers are matched to a participant, and they'll typically support them for a few months. That might be to look at addressing needs around learning English language or developing a better understanding of the travel systems in the city, or registering with local services and connecting with community groups and organisations. We also provide group sessions that bring people together for social opportunities, language learning, other skills development, and opportunities to do creative things such as our art project. We provide advice and guidance. We've got a refugee support worker who is able to offer free advice and signposting, making referrals to other organisations. That could be anything from helping people find a solicitor to registering for housing, or it might be referrals to food banks, or whatever a person's needs are. We'll look at how we can connect them to the support that they need, or provide the advice that we're able to.
Yeah. And obviously those things like that specific advice around the legal support and benefits advice or stuff around government legislation is really important. I'm thinking about, the groups that you have where you bring people together. You talked about a sense of belonging. Communities Inc. has been working with Refugee Roots before, when it was the Rainbow Project. And I remember coming along to the women's knitting group. And it's not really about knitting, is it? It's about creating those opportunities that bring people together into a space that they maybe otherwise ordinarily wouldn't access. And then whilst in that space, they're meeting and engaging with people that maybe have some similar experiences. And that's really important, isn't it, to be able to create those spaces?
It really is. And so for many of our participants, whether the draw is that there are free language classes, or it's that there's an opportunity to do something creative like the art sessions, it does also help people to form those friendships and build those connections in their community. And that resource of community and network becomes very useful for them to tap into for a sense of empowerment, but also for practical help and support. It helps to build confidence for participants, and also increase their sense of belonging, which helps to address feelings of isolation and feelings of loneliness as well, because the whole experience of coming somewhere completely new, having lost those connections with family, with community, are so much felt by our participants, because home, they're where they're from, their origin is such a distant experience because of the journeys that they've taken to flee where they've been.
Yeah, I mean, unfortunately, we're used to hearing sort of these sound bites in the media and on the news, stop the boats as a way of, addressing the immigration challenges. I mean, I wanted to ask you, what is the reality like? What are some of the backgrounds and places that people are coming from? What are the experiences that they're trying to get away from to some safety?
Well, certainly with the boats, the Refugee Council have some really useful statistics on this, and they say that on average 6 out of 10 people crossing the boats were asylum claimants. So the majority of people that are coming through are coming from countries affected by war. They're coming from places where it's not safe to be to hold a particular political opinion or to convert religion, and so many of the people fleeing are in fact people that go on to be granted leave to remain. And so there's this rhetoric and there's this message that it's illegal migrants, it's people that are undeserving that are coming on these boats, when in fact the actual system that attests whether people should be granted a form of protection is actually granting to those people coming through on boats some form of protection. So it's a contradiction in many ways to what's being put out as a message about the boats, and of course there are huge concerns around that as a way of travelling, and it does, lives are lost and people, it is horrific, but that only points to the desperation and the extent to which people's lives are threatened in the countries that they're coming from.
Yeah,
Certainly.
I think it says something about the challenges that people face if they're prepared to put their lives at risk to actually get away from those environments and situations, doesn't it?
Exactly, and there aren't safe and legal routes for all the efforts to provide schemes that can allow for people from different countries, whether that's been things like the Homes for Ukraine or the Afghan resettlement or the Syrian resettlement. These schemes do allow some people and provide a way for people to find that connection to the UK and protection in the UK, but still so many are missed by those schemes because, to go back to the boats, a lot of the people on boats were from places like Afghanistan, so those schemes are inadequate in and of themselves. So there needs to be legal and safe routes as an alternative. That would help address the issue of the risks that people are taking to come on boats. But there isn't anything like that presently, and those schemes are only accessible by small numbers, and the problems in the world are much greater.
Yeah, and like you say, we get told there are safe, routes for people to come to this country, but as you say, they're often inadequate and don't really meet the needs of, the people that, are needing to be using them. I mean, another term that we hear a lot about is, the hostile environment, and there's been a lot of effort to try and create a hostile environment for people coming from different countries. Do you think that has any impact? I mean, or how does it affect people that are already here? And do you think it does provide a deterrent to those who might be considering? So I guess it's two questions. Those that are here, the impact it has on them, and does it deter people that might think about coming over?
Well, for all of the efforts to deter people from taking those crossings and making those journeys, or to come on lorries or whatever it might be, we've seen higher numbers than ever before in terms of people coming, seeking protection, seeking refuge. and the rise of wars and situations have meant that there's even more migration to places like the UK, and that's true of parts of Europe too. That these are some of the highest numbers that we've seen of people fleeing their home, and so the deterrent factor is making things a lot more difficult and complicated and affecting people who do come through and make it to the UK, but it's not necessarily leading to less people needing help. People will still need help, whether we have a hostile approach or not, because the situations that people are escaping are not going away anytime soon, and they're not going away quickly either. Certainly for people that we work with and that we know, their experience of hostility might be in their daily interactions with the general public. It might be with professionals, whether that's people they encounter in the healthcare system or they encounter in the immigration system, that they are met with hate, they're met with racial abuse, they're often misunderstood, mistreated, and that further adds to a sense of isolation and to loneliness. And I think too that for many, many of our participants, when things like the announcement about Rwanda was made, we had numerous reports of people who were really, really worried and concerned about what that would mean for them if they were to be deported to Rwanda. And it caused a number of our participants to struggle to sleep. They were struggling, they lost appetite because all they could think about was this consuming worry that they had that they were going to be deported. Already many of our participants live with such uncertainty around the outcome of their claims, and they have so much fear about being returned to their country of origin. And so when headlines read certain changes in legislation or intentions of the Home Office or the government directly linked to their lives and their experience, it does fill people with concern and worry. Yeah. And we've seen that, and often we'll be asked questions about this by our participants, like, am I going to suddenly be deported? What's going to happen? And that's not a question that we can answer. It's not a conversation we can necessarily have, and so we would put them in the direction of their legal advisor, a solicitor or a lawyer who can advise them on their particular immigration status. So it's definitely there is that experience for people of being worried, of being concerned, being fearful, because of the implications of decisions that are made, because of headlines, because of messaging that they hear, and because of the influence of that messaging on the wider public, who then are we know, for example, that participants of ours were directly affected by far-right protesters near some temporary accommodation that were causing trouble, really, and that was deeply upsetting for many of them. They felt unsafe and unwelcome in that community, and felt targeted. And those feelings of insecurity are exactly linked back to often the trauma of maybe the insecurities that they've had in their country of origin, where they've left somewhere hoping to get away from feelings of fear and being in danger, and yet they've been met with sometimes quite aggressive acts in this country from people who have got very anti immigration views and racist views
Yeah.
as well. So I think those are some of the ways that participants that we work with are affected.
Yeah. It's sort of trauma upon trauma, though, isn't it? Sort of adding even
Yeah.
more onto people that are still struggling with, what they've sort of tried to get away from, as it were.
One of the ways in which legislation and policy directly affects our participants and the refugees that we're working with can be seen in recent decisions, for example, whereby the Home Office are trying to get people out of places like the hotels. They're making decisions quicker than before, and they've really sped up that process, which is leading to increased levels of homelessness as well, as people are being evicted from their Home Office accommodation, and there's not the provision available in their local area where they've been living. And in fact, that's a real pressure that we are experiencing now, because the time from when somebody gets that positive decision on their case and they're granted some form of protection to when benefits can start for them, or when they get their national insurance number so they can begin working, that period of time often comes around too quick, and the housing isn't lined up and the job isn't lined up, or the benefits aren't in place. So people experience destitution. But it also goes the other way, that people who have a negative outcome to their asylum claims, who might be able to appeal that decision, their support also stops, and then the time to get that reinstated can often mean that they too face destitution. So whilst we're seeing positive decisions made on people's cases, and that's really, really great to see that they're getting that affirmation, and that they are indeed in need of protection, and that's affirmed, and they get their status. They're then presented with a very difficult reality of homelessness and destitution. So it's those are things that we do directly see. So when policy is made, it does affect real people, and it's not just numbers, and they are individual people who've got names, who've got often families as well, people with families facing homelessness, and then that becomes a pressure on our local authorities and on the council. And so it's bearing, keeping that in mind, that when we pick up messages of X, Y, and Z is happening, those decisions will have implications on real people.
I mean, you mentioned sort of headlines. I've got a couple of headlines. I'm just going to just
Okay.
sort of some of the key things that you hear about in the news. Okay, so first of all, people think that refugees and asylum seekers live in luxury hotel accommodation. What's the reality behind that, do you think?
The reality is that a lot of the accommodation that has been used would not have been suitable for most paying customers. Often they're not in the best condition. Some of them were decommissioned. Some of them were not fit for purpose, and that's certainly true of venues that have been used in Nottingham, where we are. We've had proof of all sorts of things. Everything you can imagine that would be horrible to experience in your room, from bed bugs to issues of damp, issues of illness spreading because of the way in which people are so closely confined, and issues around food as well, and food being not to satisfactory standard, but also sometimes inappropriate too, and so people have not even had their basic needs met in these in some of these hotels or other venues that provide temporary accommodation or emergency accommodation to these new arrivals, and so it's a very different reality to the idea that people are in luxury hotels or living it up somehow. And in fact, the other reality for those that are in such accommodation is that they don't have the same financial support either. So then they have very little finances to do anything else with. And so if the food is a really poor standard and they've only got £8, then it's unlikely that they're going to spend all of that on replenishing because of the lack of decent food that they've had, nor are they going to necessarily pay for any treatment to bed sores that they might have or other things that they encounter because of that. And there are a lot of concerns, and there have been throughout the time that hotels and other temporary venues have been used to accommodate new arrivals. I'm glad to say that we had seen improvement thanks to the efforts of some local organisations that really championed change. But like with everything, things go up and down, and sometimes you make a lot of progress with something, and then you could be back to square one. So it has been a constant struggle to keep the well-being and the health of residents in such venues at the forefront, because it's always changing from week to week, and every person is unique too. So what one person can take, another maybe can't. So there's huge needs, certainly for those that are in that type of accommodation.
Yeah, I think it's just the word hotel. People sort of have in their minds, luxury hotel, living it up. Whereas, as you say, a lot of it is substandard, not in good condition, and people wouldn't even pay to stay there. So it's, another thing that people say is that people coming over into this country means that British people won't be able to get jobs. So they're coming over, taking our jobs, as it were, as well as taking our housing, I suppose, is another one that we hear. But what about the jobs element? What's the reality of that?
Well, certainly for new arrivals and people claiming asylum, they're not allowed to work. So from that perspective, they're not taking any jobs, and there are lots of positive contributions that people with leave to remain do make to our society. In fact, there's about 1,200 medically qualified refugees that are registered with the British Medical Association database, and it costs considerably less to train a doctor from another country than it does train somebody here. And we know all the pressures that are on the medical services, on the NHS, and surely it's a good thing to have more people employed as medical professionals. And that's just it's because of the cost of converting somebody's qualifications. It's just a lot. It's a lot less than what it would take to put somebody from the very start of training to becoming a fully qualified doctor or medical professional. So, that's just one example. But we have tons of experiences ourselves at Refugee Roots of people that contribute so meaningfully to Nottingham as a city too, whether that's by volunteering in local food banks or whether that's by working in local, it might be restaurants, it might be working in taxi services, it could be working as dentists, working as teachers, as counsellors. Because a lot of the people that we do work with have got professional backgrounds and have got a lot to offer. They have a rich experience of working and providing for themselves, and that's something that's they lose. That's taken away from them by just being an asylum seeker, which is quite different to obviously those that have come through the schemes who, like the Ukrainians for Home, in fact, Ukrainians could work immediately, and we've been really pleased to see a number of the Ukrainians that we've worked with find employment by working with other organisations to help them get through that. And some of those language classes that we've provided and the befriending that we've offered as well have been really, really key to those individuals going on to be able to get employed. And in fact, we had this campaign where we had 30 plus bicycles that we were able to give away to a number of different refugees, and there was one Ukrainian lady in particular who was starting a job on the weekend, and she didn't know how she would get there, and she was weighing up the cost of travel, and then picked up our message about a bicycle. I got a message on WhatsApp of her cycling to work for her first day, so we know that people want to contribute, they want to be part of society. That can take on the form of voluntary contributions, but also paid employment, and often the jobs that people pick up too, lots of other people aren't applying for either, and sadly some people who are highly qualified can't even get jobs in their career, in their profession, and we do know unfortunately too many people that have had to settle for jobs that will not pay as well as jobs that they were accustomed to, and isn't utilising their real skills and their real profession, because they just have to do anything just to get by.
We hear stories about farmers talking about fruit and veg rotting because they don't have the people to pick them. So it's it's like you say, it's not about taking anybody else's job. It's often doing some of the labour intensive hard work that maybe other people don't want to do.
Yeah.
I mean, you mentioned Ukraine. I mean, do you think there was the support in terms of what was made available to people at the beginning of the Ukraine war? And I think that was great. I think it was great that we sent those messages about people being welcome, about providing a home, shelter, that sanctuary. Do you think we treat people differently depending on where they're from? Because it was noticeable that we, the country as a whole, as it were, did go out of our way to help the Ukrainians, and I think that's right. I also think we should be doing that for anybody that's in that position where they're fleeing a dangerous position. Do you have any thoughts on that?
It's really hard to quantify or qualify whether or not there is something there that indicates racism or perhaps a preference to people from Ukraine because they are most white and because they've got more in common culturally and religiously too, perhaps. So there's less feeling of difference. So that is certainly a possibility. And I think that you're right, that actually we should offer the same opportunities for sanctuary and for refuge to everybody, no matter who they are, where they're from. That shouldn't be a barrier for us. And I think that there's also a closeness in distance too, in that Ukraine is still fairly close to us, and it doesn't seem as far away as maybe some of the Middle Eastern countries. It's also quite a natural thing that because the headline, the news was covering what was happening in Ukraine, and we were aware. It was in people's minds in a way that a lot of other wars aren't as widely reported, or only make the news for a period of time. It might be a day and then it's gone. And some of the situations that other refugees are coming from, the struggle and the war has been going on for much longer, and it's very historic, and perhaps because of that too, there's a disconnect. Yeah.
So do you think? I mean, I get what you're saying in terms of the proximity. Maybe people could relate more to people. There was a bit of me at the time that thought, actually, this is going to open people's eyes to the plight of refugees, asylum seekers, people that are fleeing dangerous situations. And there was a bit of me that was hoping, hopefully people will realise this is what people that are fleeing Afghanistan, Yemen, other parts of the world are facing as well. Do you think it actually changed anything in terms of attitudes generally towards refugee and asylum seekers? Because there was quite a lot of empathy available for the Ukrainians. Did that shift over? Did that sort of soften people's attitudes, do you think?
Well, from our experience, we definitely reached a whole other audience of volunteers, of donors, of people in the local community who wanted to do something to help and to respond. And for many of them, they've had the opportunity to also meet other refugees from other parts of the world, and they're now involved in our organisation or in touch with the organisation, and so they've been invited into a much broader experience. But the initial trigger for them, the response for them, was that they wanted to do something specifically about Ukrainians. So I think for some people, it probably did give them that opportunity to have that empathy. Whether or not that's widespread and that has changed things, I'm not sure. But there's certainly coverage of all sorts of things happening in the world that does spark in people. I want to do something positive. I want to help. I want to do something. And I think because Refugee Roots took a very proactive approach to responding, it gave us a real platform to engage with society, and also give us openings into new partnerships with other organisations that we're still working with now, and that's benefiting other refugees too, and not just Ukrainians, although their first point of contact with us was because of a shared interest in doing something about Ukrainian refugees to help and support them. So there are all sorts of benefits that have come out of that for us as an organisation by embracing Ukrainian refugees. And also the Ukrainians that we have worked with, they've been enriched too by coming into a very diverse organisation with people from all over the world. And one of our participants in particular comments on how she's got friends now from places like Morocco and Turkey, and that's an opportunity that she had because she was part of our women's group. The diversity in Refugee Roots has really flourished because of the inclusion of Ukrainians. Because now we've got this really interesting blend and mix of people who are culturally very, very different, who look different, who have different colour of skin, and they relate and they get on. And it makes it less obvious that that it is a refugee gathering of refugees learning English. It just kind of makes it look like here's a bunch of people that just want to connect, that want to have the opportunities to build their lives again, and they make those friendships and they make those connections with one another. So I think that's been really fantastic for us to have a whole other group of people that are contributing and that are part of the support that we offer, and then who give back as well, and some of our partners now in the refugee world in terms of services in Nottingham have got Ukrainians that are employed in their services. And so we now see people that we met in those early days when they were first arriving, working in quite significant jobs, helping other refugees, because they've had that opportunity through those networks that we've been part of.
Yeah.
And it's fair to say it is that it's been a collaborative coming together that's brought about those positive outcomes. It's not just down to one sole organisation, but actually for all of the groups that rallied together and said we want to do something.
Yeah.
That's what's led to some really positive outcomes.
That's really great. I mean, you've attended our Stand By Me training, in terms of things that people can do if they see somebody else being targeted by hate, inappropriate behaviour, prejudice. And one of the things that we say on the training is, the deep psychology of the bystander is a denial of a connection. When you see something happening to somebody and you think, they're not from my city, they're not from my ethnicity, they're not from my street, or, from my tribe, however we want to describe that. And the antidote to that is building those connections. And that's something that I think you do so well, because you bring those diverse people together that might look at each other in a different environment and think we've got nothing in common, and suddenly they're in a room, you start interacting, you start maybe realising you've got a similar sense of humour, or you've got a similar sort of background in terms of interests, and that's what really then motivates us to help others when they need help, because we can relate to them. So I think you do a fantastic job in terms of bringing those people together and helping people make those connections. And as you say, it's not just coming to your project and doing this. Those are skills, and capabilities that they're going to take through the rest of their lives now. So, I mean, we could. There's lots. I know they've got very specific projects that we could talk more about, and we'll definitely have to have you back. But you've talked about volunteers. If there's anybody listening and thinking, oh, that's something I might be interested in, what sorts of opportunities do you have? How can people get in touch with you if they want to find out more or get involved in volunteering?
Well, it's quite straightforward. Just head over to our website. It's refugeeroots.org.uk, and in the Get Involved part of the menu, you can apply to volunteer, and we'll follow that up and find opportunities to get you connected in to the organisation.
Great. And I just remembered you mentioned something about an art project. Could you just say something more about that?
Yes, certainly. I mean, so the art project, I was thinking one really moving moment was when a number of the participants shared the meaning behind some of their artwork, and it wasn't prompted at all by us. It just happened naturally, and one of the Ukrainians revealed that the artwork was to do with the war, and we had then a Sudanese person saying, I remember what it was like for me when I first heard gunshots. And so they had this connection of a shared experience that came about through doing some painting and just being in a safe space where they could have those conversations. And we had a great exhibition at the old bus depot, which started the launch of Refugee Week, and participants were able to see their work on the exhibition. And we actually had pieces of art that came from people from Hong Kong as well, who had experienced those challenges too, and that conflict. And we had everything from jars that had been recycled materials that were where people had sewn and used fabrics and materials to decorate these objects like vases and things like that. We had photography, we had paintings, and some of the paintings we were able to copy and scan them basically, and then blow them up to really quite impressive sizes, and people that thought their artwork was the size of an A4 page suddenly saw it in a gallery, and it was very moving for them, and we had such wonderful contributions, and so we'll be heading towards another exhibition. The next Refugee Week, we're signed up to exhibit again at the Sherwood Art Week later next year, all sorts of plans. But we continue to have twice weekly art sessions, using a variety of art mediums as a way of exploring creativity, of connecting with one another, and giving people the opportunity to learn a new skill, or even just have that sense of achievement by doing something and having that satisfaction of completing something and seeing a finished piece of work. And that's all guided by professional artists as well. So it's making use of some really talented local artists. Some do happen to come from refugee backgrounds or backgrounds of migration, and so they have a particular awareness of the community that they're working with. And others are local people. Could have been people that were students here, art students, or it could be people that are born and bred, as I would say, Nottingham folk that are artists working professionally, and this becomes a part of their income, but also a highlight of their week as well for many of them too, because sometimes it's quite a different way for them to engage in their creative practice. So it's a real joy to kind of see people getting together and exploring all different creative forms. I think we've been now at the Playhouse for Nottingham Playhouse for quite a number of months now, and that's we're going to carry that on for as long as we can, basically, on Tuesdays, and those will be free art sessions to refugees, and we have a number of volunteers that come and get involved in that too, and usually anything from 6 to 10 people in attendance, and it's a very different experience for participants to get to know one another and explore creativity that way.
That's great. You know, Adam, it's been a pleasure talking to you. I know you do lots of different projects, lots of different opportunities for people to get involved in spaces where they can feel safe, where they can feel they can connect with other people around them. We'll have to definitely get you back and drill down into some of those projects in a bit more detail. But thank you very much for all the work that you do. I mean, working with people that come with trauma and being able to provide a bit of a haven, a bit of a space is really important. And thank you for addressing some of those common sort of myths that people might have about why people are here and what they're doing when they get here. Often people, I think, are just still struggling and trying to sort of restabilise themselves, which is enough in itself to focus on. So thank you very much, and if anybody does want to contact Refugee Roots, if you want to get involved as a volunteer, go onto the website and get in touch. Thank you very much, Adam.
Thank you.